So, hey, what I want to do is read. This is, the weird thing is that with the pandemic, you have all this time, right? And I talked to other reader friends who have said, I've got all this time to write and to write and to write, and nothing's happening. And I get that. And it's been hard. It's just really ironic that everything you wished for is now sort of like, it's hard to write during a time like this. But I have a new poem because I've been thinking about, the most important part of the day, the thing I'm most excited about is our meals. That's like, I'm sure it's true for most of you, like really looking forward to, your meal at the end of the day. So I wrote this poem. I thought about all meals that we've had and all meals I've had, and I'm going to read that. And it's called Autobiography of the Table and the Kitchen. There have been meals I have loathed and meals I've despised. Most recent, a rubbered patty oozing beneath its own greased shambles at a truck stop in Buffalo, the steam of plate clatter and diesel smoke, the only things divine. Meals eaten in silence when I was 7, and the air between my parents suffocated the table. Doom's easy smolder ready to fill our lives with smoke. Meals joyous at drive-ins, slicked in ketchup and glazed napkins. Meals of befuddlement slung mornings after sleepovers. Bagel and omelet birthing a new lexicon to mouthwater. Meals of out, out, wooden spoon cracking the pot's rim as children scattered from the kitchen, giggling snipes. Meals of despair before college. One-room tenement charred into dusk like a bandage as I jawed microwave burritos, stoned in my conviction, the mattress bloomed a Rorschach of clues. Meals of first dates palpitated by wicker Chianti and the shedding of garments, laughing about too much garlic as the sheets roiled in the hunger of our want. Meals tilled from farmers' markets and roadside stands, greens a new study in color and plumage. The waxy peppers shined like the tongues of small fires. Solo meals of comfort after personal disasters, the counter serving as respite for the maligned. Meals of regret and meals of plenty. Meals of family faces ensconced around a tablecloth saved crisp just for meals like that. And meals with you, simple across the table, all those years of what we said and what we couldn't, meals best enjoyed with our eyes instead of our stomachs, meals when we couldn't fill our mouths fast enough, the meal we had at a busted kitchen table in our new apartment 25 years ago, surprising you first with purple irises, bottle of Coteron hollowed dry, the way you stared at me and me at your working mouth, your hair swooning against your collarbones with a rhythm I had grown to love, and me finally putting down the fork and the knife and lifting the napkin from my lap and coming over to you and raising us up to the many-toothed stars and all their crying out. Food's good. Food has good memories. Food has bad memories. I hope you like that one. So I'm going to read a story from this collection. So this is it. If you haven't bought it yet, this is 25 Trumbulls Road. For those who have picked it up, thank you so much for your support and for supporting Black Lawrence Press, one of the best small presses in the country. They do fantastic work. And this is a collection of stories that all happen at the same address, 25 Trumbulls Road, where I happen to be sitting right now. I live really at 25 Trumbulls Road. None of these things really happened, sort of. Maybe some did. I'm just not really at liberty to say. But I'm going to read something I haven't yet read in public. So this is called Case 34, September 2013. And all these stories are laid out in a sort of an odd style. They're listed as exhibits. And so instead of paragraphs, we have exhibits. It's sort of like, you remember like the government and like the Blue Book where they were looking for UFOs and it was very formal and they did all of that. This is similar in that this is almost like this government study case thing. And that's what it is. Case 34, September 2013. Exhibit number 2. Zach attached the trail cam to a birch tree. He was sure feral hogs had taken to rooting through the compost in nearby garden, but wanted proof. There, Zach said. Screw you, piggies. Babe, how's it look? Janine called. Not bad, Zach said as he stood back from the camera, hands on hips. He glanced back at his wife and son. Janine was tossing the Nerf to Mason, and every time he caught it, he yelled, "Hot dog!" Mason, it's touchdown, remember? Zach said. Janine made a face. Come on, hun. He's 5. Who cares? Zach turned back to the camera, looked down the wooden path. The early September sun was thin and warm. They'd only been moved in for about a month, and Zach thought if it wasn't one thing, it was another. Hot dog! Mason yelled again. Okay, Zach said, turning slowly. Who's ready to fight the evil Bigfoot? Zach raised his arms and laughed in a deep voice, running at his wife and son. They both screamed in unison, absolutely thrilled. Exhibit 5. Janine sipped her tea in bed while reading an oversized world history book on her lap. You know the Phoenicians were fucking rock stars, right? Zach spit a mouthful of toothpaste into the white ceramic basin and looked back up at the mirror. The Phoenicians? Yeah, Janine called. Their boats and navigation skills were out of bounds. Out of bounds? Who are you, Guy Fieri? Zach asked as he came out of the bathroom and slipped under the covers. Zach leaned into Janine's body, kissed her neck. She smelled like lavender and honey. You're lucky I don't look like Guy Fieri, Janine said, flipping a page over. Fat chance, Zach said. He moved in closer. Come on, Mason's still awake, Janine said without looking at him. Zach was about to protest when he heard someone run through the yard. Exhibit 6. Janine pointed the flashlight from the doorway, her bathrobe shut tight with the other hand. She directed the beam towards Zach in the garden. She could see his own light moving back and forth across the grass. See anything? She asked. Zach didn't respond. Zach, she called. Hey, Zach, shh, you wake the neighbors, Janine heard him say. It's cold out here, she said. Well, go inside. She looked across the street at the Timley's house. Mr. Timley was looking back through his living room bay window. Oh, for God's sakes, Janine thought, and cinched her bathrobe tighter. Zach, Janine said, I'm going in. Wait, Zach said. You've got to be kidding me, he said to the darkness. Exhibit 8. Janine held Zach's hand under the faucet in the kitchen. Zach grimaced. It's not a big deal, he said. Blood splashed with the water and ran pink down the drain. Well, it could get infected, Janine said. Zach made a face again, took his hand back. It's fine. Janine sighed, tore off a wad of paper towels. Well, here then, try not to bleed all over the house, okay? Zach pressed the paper towels against his hand. Look, I'm sorry, he said. I'm just a little freaked out. Well, it's going to need stitches, Janine said. Zach removed the paper towels, and a deep 3-inch slice ran clean across his palm. Probably, he said. But you know, whatever. How did you do that again, Janine asked. I don't know. I mean, as I got closer to the camera, I leaned down a little, putting my hand against the tree. Then I slid my hand up and bam! Well, maybe you caught it on one of the bungee hooks or something, Janine said. She moved in to get a closer look. Yeah, maybe. Is Daddy okay? Janine let out a little sound, and Zach flinched. Behind them, Mason stood in the kitchen doorway in his race car pajamas. Mason, sweetie, you startled us, Janine said, smiling. Yes, Daddy just got a little boo-boo. Janine went around Zach and picked Mason up. I had a dream you got hurt, Mason said. You did, buddy? Zach asked. Mason put his head on Janine's shoulder. Yeah, you were outside in the yard. A little man was hiding behind the trees so you couldn't see his teeth. He kept hurting you. Mommy was crying because she knew it would be her turn next. Zach tried to look calm. Shh, that's just a bad dream, sweetie. Zach rubbed Mason's head. Janine's eyes were wide, but Zach wouldn't look at her and just concentrated on Mason's face. He rubbed Mason's blonde hair until Mason began to breathe steadily, and the three of them were quiet then, huddled in the kitchen light. Exhibit 11, redacted. Exhibit 12, Zach called his office and said he'd be up for the day. Mason woke up with a slight fever and needed to stay home from kindergarten. Mason's temp had only been 99.5, but rules nowadays said any sign of a fever and you needed to keep your child home. You should have seen how it was when I was a kid, Zach thought. Unless I was pissing blood, I was forced to go to school. Yeah, but Zach didn't mind. Janine had a full schedule, and his hand was killing him anyway. Besides, he wanted to see if there were any photos on the trail cam. Mason sat on the living room floor with a bowl of green grapes and watched Little Einsteins. He'll be okay by himself for a couple of minutes, Zach thought, and quietly slipped out the side door and into the backyard. Exhibit 13. The sky was blue and deep as a lake. Zach popped the memory card out of the bottom of the trail cam and back into the Canon Sure Shot. He looked back and forth for any sign of movement in the woods, briefly searched the ground for any hoof prints. Nothing. He powered the camera on while walking into the house, and the photo counter said the total had risen from 101 photos to 106. Aha, Zach thought as he made his way inside and sat at the dining room table. I got you. Zach could hear the little Einsteins singing about adagios in the living room. How you doing, little man? He said. Good, Mason said. Zach looked at the camera's flat screen and fast-forwarded past old shots of Mason's 5th birthday, the trip last winter to New Orleans, and this year's Easter egg hunt at the old house. Mason looked cute with his white bunny ears, proudly hoisting the full wicker basket above his shoulder. That's when Zach landed on the first photo from last night. The picture was a night vision shot of the compost pile and its chicken wire hoop, the side of a pine tree, and the beat-up old tool shed in the background. Wholly unremarkable. The second photo was the same, and the third. Zach could feel his excitement deflating. But the fourth plainly showed the snout, ears, and bristled backside of a wild hog standing next to the chicken wire. Zach sat up. Damn, he said out loud. There you are. The thing was at least 4 feet long and all black. He thought he could also see little tusks. Jesus, it's a bona fide razorback, he thought. Zach was thinking about the next steps if he'd need to capture the beast or worse, shoot it. What if it came into the yard, even during the day? What if it tried to gore Janine or Mason? Zach pictured his son's little body flying into the air and the terrible sounds the pig would make as it bit into the soft flesh of Mason's face and neck. The fifth photo made Zach blink. Sure, he was seeing it wrong. It still showed the wild pig standing next to the compost, but now there was a little hand reaching from outside the frame and touching the back of the hog. It seemed to be resting on the animal, almost steadying it. The hand looked about the same size as Mason's. Hey, Mason, Zach could hear himself say out loud. Can I ask you a question? Exhibit 16. Mason kept saying no every time Zach found a new way to ask him if he woke up last night and went outside for any reason. Are you sure, little man? I won't be mad. No, Mason replied, looking up at the ceiling, exasperated. I just came downstairs when I heard you and Mommy fighting. Hey, we weren't fighting, Zach said. Zach noticed Mason's face had grown increasingly flushed and reached out to touch his son's forehead. Mason, are you feeling hotter, sweetie? Kinda, Mason replied. Zach looked his son in the eyes. The whites had an almost blue tint to them, a sure sign of dehydration. Zach picked Mason up and carried him upstairs to his room. Mason grew limp in Zach's arms, radiating heat through his pajamas like a tiny skeleton on fire. Exhibit 17. Mason was sweating even though Zach pressed a cold cloth against his forehead. He'd already had his boy drink some children's Advil and wash it down with several cold sips of Gatorade. The thermometer started beeping, and Zach took it out of Mason's mouth. 103 degrees. Shit, Zach said. Mommy said no swearing, Mason said, and Zach smiled. He'd already texted Janine, and she was on her way home. Hey, let's get these PJs off, Zach said. Mason just kind of rolled around as Zach got his shirt off. The heat radiating from his body reminded Zach of morning after campfires. He moved the cloth across Mason's torso, his thin arms, felt the cloth grow warm in his hand. Does this house scare you? Mason asked. Zach stopped. What? He said. This house, Mason repeated. What are you talking about? Zach said. Mason smiled, and his teeth were bright. Listen, sweetie, you need to rest, okay? You have a fever, and he told me you'd get yours, Daddy. That we all would. Zach blinked, licked his lips. Who did? He's in the kitchen, Mason said. And that's when Zach heard the breakfast table and chairs stutter across the linoleum, as if someone were sitting down to eat. Exhibit 18. Hello? Zach yelled as he slowly made his way down the stairs. He was clutching a coat hanger, the closest thing he found to grab. Hello? He said again. Zach smelled what he thought were black truffles, that funky animal sweat kind of smell they had, and he stopped. The smell was raw, alive. Zach gagged, put the back of his hand to his mouth. He thought his heart was going to pound out of his chest. Whoever you are, I called the cops and they're on the way, Zach lied. So you better just leave. He inched his way through the dining room and heard Janine's car pulling up on the driveway. Zach stepped into the kitchen. Exhibit 20. Janine got out of her car and walked toward the side door. Dr. Willis had said he'd make room in his schedule and they could bring Mason in right away. She hoped Zach was ready to go and glanced up at Mason's window. The curtain fluttered as Mason stepped out of view. Janine stopped. What the hell? She thought. She moved urgently to the door and opened it, stepping inside the mudroom. Zach, she called. She hung her car keys up on the little hook. Why is Mason in here, Mommy? Mason said from the kitchen. He sounded happy, and Janine felt relieved. She walked into the kitchen. All the chairs were splayed, and it looked like Zach was on the floor behind the table. He was making small, wet noises. Janine opened her mouth. Now it's your turn, Mommy, Mason said. The end. There you go. Here's my story for today, guys. Thanks so much for, again, for listening, being part of this. I really appreciate you being here today. You could be a lot of other places, especially when it's this beautiful out. So thanks again to Black Press for doing this and for all you being here. I really, really appreciate it.